Eddie, just to simplify this, Conor Benn, your fighter. Eubank Jr., Kalle Sauerland's fighter. The fight was called off because Conor failed not one, but 2 drugs tests. If we keep it simple, regards testing, people understand it an awful lot more. If the failed drugs test, Eddie, had never been leaked to the newspapers, would you have happily put the fight on knowing what you knew? How close were you to being involved in what would be perceived to be a big drugs cover-up?
Because contractually, as I said to Simon, we rely on the sanction of the British Boxing Board of Control. When these tests were uncovered, it went straight to the governing body of the sport, the regulatory arm, the disciplinary committee, if you like, to make a decision. There's also a lot of rubbish about leaking of the press.
So you had no control as to whether the fight was going to go on or not? None at all?
Contractually, regardless of what Simon wants to say, and he acknowledges this, and I'm happy to debate it further, contractually, in the fight contract with Chris Eubank Jr., the way that fight gets cancelled is if the British Boxing Board of Control do not sanction the fight, or Chris Eubank Jr. terminates the agreement due to the testing. Chris Eubank Jr. wanted to proceed with the bout. The board took 5 weeks to make a decision. I go on record to say the board made the correct decision. I wish they wouldn't have waited 5 weeks. There's also rubbish out there to say, and I back the board on this actually, where they say the board didn't sanction the fight because it got leaked to the press.
So as soon as we found out here, and everybody else found out, that Conor Benn has failed 2 drugs tests, were you then pushing there and then for the fight to be called off?
The fight was already not sanctioned by the British Boxing Board of Control.
Were you pushing for the fight to be called off?
Yes.
On that day?
Do you know who pulled the fight?
On that day?
On that day, that night. I pulled the fight that night. We had various options. Number 1 was an injunction. Number 2 was to work with another governing body or regulatory arm, of which I really didn't want to do. The mistake that I made, and I stand by that, and I believe the only mistake, I don't think it was handled perfectly by anybody. The big mistake that I made is when I rocked up to the workout on the Wednesday, I'd literally received the letter from the British Boxing Board of Control an hour before. I faced the media, and myself and Kalle Sauerland couldn't believe this process had been going on for 5 weeks, and all of a sudden, what were we going to do? I shouldn't have said, we're looking at our options. I should have just taken it, and I believe the board made the right decision. I had the option, and so did Kalle, to proceed with the fight.
So why did you say we're considering our options? Because then it looked as if you put money ahead of morals.
Yeah, I think, look, we were...
Do you regret that?
Yeah, I do regret considering our options. I do, because I think the board made the right decision. I was a bit shell-shocked. All of a sudden, I had 100 cameras asking me questions, what are you going to do? And what I said was, look, the British Boxing Board of Control have told us they don't acknowledge VADA. They only acknowledge UCAD. He's had 4 UCAD tests in the run-up to this fight. Everyone is negative, and we need to consider our position.
I want to bring Simon in a second. Eddie, Sauerland told us on the day of the drugs test reveal that both teams were given specific independent medical advice on the drug in question. He claimed both fighters were happy to carry on. Since when should it be up to the fighters to choose which banned substance they can or can't fight with?
It's not. It's up to the British Boxing Board.
But that's what it looked like.
No. Chris Eubank Jr. and Sauerland. Sauerland had their own individual medical analysis with Chris Eubank Jr. regarding the testing, the other test dates around it, the test that he'd failed, the levels of the test. And their specialists believed that it was non-performance enhancing and were prepared to proceed with the bout. Ultimately, if the British Boxing Board of Control do not sanction the fight, which is what happened, the fight does not take place.
But you were in line with that. You were in line with that. I mean, it is pretty preposterous to suggest that anyone can have a commentary, irrespective of the PED, to suggest I'll allow my fighter who shredded weight, who should have been told, but it would have seemed not been told, on the 23rd of August that someone's has an adverse drug finding, hasn't been told, according to you, until the second drugs test. He's now fully trained, fully in a situation, going for what I think was a freak show of a fight anyway at a catchweight level. And now you're in a situation where ultimately you and Kalle were looking at an opportunity to be able to use your influence or find an outcome that suited you best. The reasons why you mentioned about alternate routes is because that's precisely what you meant. And then you looked at it, and maybe your dad tapped on your shoulder and gave you a bit of advice and said, son, let's have a listen to this. You go and get an injunction against the British Boxing Board of Control. First of all, you're probably not likely to get it. Second of all, if you do get it, son, what's going to happen is you're going to be the promoter that put on a fight with a boxer overcoming a technicality in a drug situation. So you were done.
No.
So then what you did is you regained your composure and thought, I'm not having any of this, and I'll pare back from it. But if you look at the whole sequence of events, the lot of you, Callie, you, and the fighter had an opportunity to deal with the British Boxing Board of Control. An adverse finding goes to them. Despite your protestations, any WADA accredited laboratory finds an adverse finding, then gets caught by UKAD. So with that in mind, the British Boxing Board of Control asked your fighter to give them some information. He refused. He told him to go do one. And then what they did was they sanctioned him there on afterwards not because of the refusal to provide them with tests, but because he refused to cooperate with them in their investigation to find out what the hell was going on.
They didn't sanction him. The board have made it clear with precedents that they do not acknowledge VADA testing. This is the whole issue around their rules. They only acknowledge...
They acknowledge adverse VADA. Yes, they do,
no,
Eddie.
They don't.
Yes,
Simon, you're not aware of... we had the whole situation with Billy Joe Saunders.
Tell you what, the British Boxing Board of Control...
Yeah, who now say, we need to look at our rules.
Because you've already told them and said they're liars, right?
I said, I've said the whole time, they took... The whole
Eddie,
thing on this...
it.
Simon, the whole thing on this
you said
is
that,
an
right?
attack on us,
No, it's
rather
not.
than the British Boxing Board of Control,
No, it's
who
not.
you had sitting next to you,
No, it's
right?
not.
Who took 5 weeks to make a decision. We get a situation
why?
like this because they didn't know what to do, and they made the right decision.
And your fighter
absolutely not
issued
nothing
cease and
to
desist,
do.
right?
No, we
and
didn't.
used a lot
no,
of
we
pressure.
didn't.
And
No,
the
we didn't.
whole structure.
You say
Hang on,
what you want
guys.
to say.
We're not going to hear if you
problem-
both keep talking over each
because
other.
the problem with you is this is what you do. You speak to Robert Smith without. It's like Eddie Hearn did this. This is a situation. They were made aware at the same time, right? Wait.
Agreed.
Okay, wait.
Agreed.
Wait.
I
Stop.
mean, Simon, you're hypothesizing here.
No.
You
But
know,
Simon,
I think it's
Eddie-
reasonable.
Eddie wants-
I think it's reasonable supposition.
Simon, I'll put it to you the same way again. In my situation, and I stand by this, and you can say, no, I would have done this, you would have done the same thing. You speak to the governing body, maybe back in the day it was the FA, and you say, you are designed to handle this situation. You're the regulatory body, you're the disciplinary committee, take away your player contracts, which might be different in football, and now we say it's up to the FA to make their decision. Just like us, the way a fight proceeds...
But they've got legislative powers, Eddie. This one hasn't. This one's funded by you lot.
No.
It's funded by you
It's got
lot.
the decision to sanction a fight or not. What are you talking
On
about?
the basis...
No. On the basis
of information,
No.
which no one will provide
on the
to them.
basis of... You're saying to me, right, how can you proceed with 2 failed tests? No. Why don't you ask the board how they can... No, you haven't. You flitted around it. The reality is, we get the stress.
You started this
We get the
conversation.
stress.
You're a
The
big boy.
board,
That's what you get
I
paid for.
don't care about stress.
As we
But
go
I
to
want to be acknowledged. The board make the decision.
Eddie,
they regard
as we go to a break,
event.
I want you to answer this straight, Eddie. Can you in any way be proud of yourself in the way this entire affair was handled, particularly in fight week?
You've asked that question as well, and I've responded before. I think I made mistakes on a Wednesday. During this process, we let, and I keep going on about it, contractually, everything that we did was done with care and thought. I think nobody particularly handled the situation well, but I will say once again, when these tests come through, our governing body, we had conversations with them, and the conversations went something like this. Robert, I know you don't acknowledge VADA. We've been here before, but basically, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And 5 weeks later, they pulled the fight. Now, the other people say about my mistake of backing Conor Benn. I say this, I believe Conor Benn. There has been no benefit to me from a profile way or from a perceived integrity position to back Conor Benn. It would have been so easy for me just to cast him aside and say, well, I'm not sure about... I believe the young man. And I've stood
Do you
by
believe him still?
100%.
Still?
100%. I've sat with him. I've sat with his family. And by the way, no one can criticise me for that. Because let me tell you, it would have been so easy.
But you
wait,
hang on, Simon.
Just
hang
wait.
on.
You're the only person who loves the sound of his own voice more than me.
I don't know about that.
Well, it's true. But what I'm saying, Simon, is I've chosen to back this young man. I've taken flack. I've taken criticism. People have told me, don't do it. Distance yourself from it.
Is that because you can't get out of it now?
No. Mate, it would be easy for me to get out of it. I've done it because I believe in Jim. I've done it because I believe in the young man.
Did you want Conor to speak to Piers Morgan and talk TV?
No, I've not given Conor Benn.
Did you know he was going to do that?
Yes, I was made aware on the day that it was coming out. I have not
the day?
Yeah, I've not given Conor Benn one piece of advice from a media perspective, from a legal perspective, or anything. One thing I stand by is I've had this young kid in my office 3 dozen times. I've had his dad in my office. I've had Tony Sims in his office, and I believe him. And I stand by that.
What we're going to do at the moment,
Conor Benn's
guys.
lawyers issue a cease and desist against the British
Not
Boxing
that
Board
I've
of
seen.
Control? Well, I'm pretty sure that they did.
Oh, and you,
right?
well, you said you were putting pressure on the board,
Let's pay
etc.
that back from you, right? But the one question that you started this conversation with is what I would do in comparison to what you would do. And that's where the argument started. And
Right,
that's
I'll
where
tell
we
you what.
differed.
What we will hear what you would have done when we come back after this.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.